which obviously concerns all of us. And we all feel for Egypt with a new population of over 85 million, a very important country. Of course, it's in Africa. Anybody that doubts that. But I think maybe there are 2 or 3 points that I could focus on. First of all, it's the role of the United States. When the U.S., for example, initially said it was caught off guard and surprised by developments in Egypt, only a nursery school child could believe that fairy tale. Because as we now well know, the United States actually probably knows more about the workings of the Egyptian military than General al-Sisi himself. Probably knows more about the Muslim Brotherhood than President Morsi himself, and probably knows more about all the opposition parties than the opposition party leaders. And how do we know that for a fact? We know that because Ed Snowden told us that. Yes. The United States is privy to all these conversations. The U.S. probably knew well in advance when this coup was going to be executed. And if we follow the current coverage, it's clearly that the U.S. is not a neutral party in what is evolving in Egypt. When the pro-Morsi demonstrators were killed in one incident, was it 70 plus? 72, according to the news accounts. If this had been any other group not affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, the headlines would have been massacre in the New York Times, on the BBC, the Washington Post. And the reaction would have been commensurate with that coverage as well. But instead, if you read the papers, they're calling it clashes between these two sides. How do you clash with a tank? How do you clash with machine guns? And this is the kind of nonsense that it really troubles us who are critical of corporate media. When corporate media becomes a part and parcel of the problem and takes sides on issues like this. So when you have a situation where the U.S. is not neutral, and the major corporate media that have the largest circulations worldwide are not neutral as well, then we have a problem. Because if we are talking about eventually the solution in Egypt, bringing all the parties together, how are you going to bring all the parties together when it's clearly signed, it's clearly obvious that the sole superpower and the corporate media are already aligned on one side? And that to me is a part of the problem. So it's not only a domestic Egyptian crisis, it's a crisis whose major players also happen to be outside Egypt. And that needs to be addressed. And the other point that has been raised, including by the moderator, was there in fact a revolution in Egypt? We all followed intensely the uprising in Tahrir Square, and many of us that care about sisters and brothers of Egypt hope that there would be a new dispensation. But then you also have to wonder, can you have a revolution by only cutting off the head of the snake? And then in Egypt, as it now seems clear that the snake can actually grow a new head or new heads. It's almost like you're back to square one, where in fact nobody's talking about the Mubarak regime anymore. It's 2 years, but now the quote-unquote enemy in Egypt is the Muslim Brotherhood. Nobody is talking about the 30 years that brought the country to where it is today. You can almost imagine now Mubarak actually being somewhere in the background, perhaps being consulted and even helping move things around. Why would it be surprising? The current so-called interim regime is using some of the same tactics that we saw during the Mubarak era. So the point I'm trying to make is that no matter what direction Egypt takes going forward in terms of trying to resolve its current crises, the role of the army also needs to be assessed, and the army needs to change. You can't have the same officers who were in place all those 30 years and then say you have a revolution. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's almost like thinking when Nasser and his fellow officers overthrew the monarchy. It was as if they overthrew the monarchy and then allowed those officers who were commanding the army of Egypt under the monarchy to continue as commanders of the new post-revolution Egypt. That doesn't make sense to me. So whether it's going to be the Muslim Brotherhood, any other opposition party, whether it's a government of national unity, it seems to me that if they're going to have a new civilian government, the army also, which is supposed to be the guarantor of the government and stability and the country's national sovereignty and security, needs to be under the control of the civilians, certainly not this army. Whether it had been a government that's not even controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, at some point, had this army become dissatisfied with that government would also go out the door. So at the end of the day, the new, eventual new government has to be able to command the army in Egypt. And it's going to be difficult if more than $1 billion of the army's cash comes from the United States.